Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue dans ce webinaire qui va être animé par Magnus Ullmann de l'Université du Canada, Brock University. Le thème aujourd'hui, c'est comment les exportateurs peuvent optimiser leur adaptation marketing à l'international. C'est le thème de notre séminaire qui va être en anglais. Donc, j'introduis en français pour repréciser l'agenda et les règles. La première, s'il vous plaît, c'est de ne pas allumer les micros, puisqu'il y a une première partie qui va être d'environ 30-35 minutes et qui est enregistrée. Et pour que d'autres, pour que ça ne soit pas pollué par des bruits parasites, je vous remercie vraiment de couper les micros. Et de la même manière, de ne pas interrompre ni poser de questions pendant l'intervention de Magnus. Ensuite, pendant le même temps, à peu près, une grosse demi-heure, 40 minutes, nous réserverons le temps pour des questions-réponses à la fin pour alimenter le débat. Et donc, à ce moment-là, bien entendu, vous pourrez rallumer vos micros. So, I'm going to switch in English right now to introduce Magnus for his webinar about how can exportator optimize their international marketing adaptation strategy. Magnus, the floor is yours for the next 30-35 minutes. I'll let you introduce yourself during your presentations.
Merci, David. I will not speak French. I'm not good enough, so I will do this in English. But good afternoon, everyone. Hello from Canada. It's about lunchtime here now. And thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to share with you some research that I've been working on together with some colleagues on exporters and how they can work and what to think about when it comes to optimizing international marketing adaptation strategies. Before we go into the actual topic, just a little bit about myself. Let's see if we can. There we go. As David was saying, I am based in Canada. As you might hear on my accent, though, I'm not Canadian. I'm actually Swedish. So I've been here at Brock for 2 years. Before that, I was about 12 years in England at the University of Leeds. And before that, I worked in Sweden. So I'm fairly new to Canada. I moved during COVID. In addition to being associate professor of marketing and international business, I'm also the International Partnership of Business School research scholar here in Canada. So I'm doing international marketing research under this heading as well. And in addition to that, I still have some connections with my old university. So I'm the senior visiting research fellow there. So I'm supervising some doctoral students and I'm working on some collaborative international marketing projects. In addition to that, I'm also acting as associate editor for International Marketing Review, and I'm on the editorial review board for Journal of International Marketing, which are the two main international marketing academic journals. So by being that, I managed to keep up to date with what is happening and what the latest developments are when it comes to international marketing. Finally, related to this, I'm sitting on the board of directors for the American Marketing Association Global Marketing Special Interest Group. So what we're doing there is that we're trying to set the agenda for what is the next big thing in international marketing and trying to listen to the trends and trying to figure out where the important aspects are and what needs to be researched in the area of international marketing. Within this special interest group, we also organize conferences every year where we share the latest research, the latest international marketing news, and so on. And usually these conferences are at quite nice places. Last year we were in Crete. Before that, we've been in Taormina, Sicily, Buenos Aires, Argentina, Santorini, Havana, Cuba. And this year, end of May, we're going to be in Santiago, Chile. So you are more than welcome to come to Santiago and join our conferences here if you're interested, provided that you pay for the travel and hotel and conference fee, of course. But more than welcome, because usually it's fun and usually you learn quite a few things. As a researcher, I am focused around international marketing. So these are some of my research interests. Primarily, I am looking into things like export performance and international marketing strategy. And I would say that's probably why I'm here today, because that's where my discussion will be revolving around. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. So the discussion then, I will be sharing some research findings, but I won't focus that much on the research part of things. We will be talking around it and to get you a little bit of a better understanding on where we are. So we're going to talk about standardization versus adaptation of export marketing and what it is and what the advantages, disadvantages are. We're going to look into something called strategy fit, which is the main topic here. Then I'm going to just quickly talk you through what we have done and leave quite a bit of time for questions and discussion in connection to the topic that we're looking at. But let's do first things first, starting with the basic. So I am, as I said, an international marketing research scholar, which means that we need to define what we're actually talking about here. So what is international marketing? Well, first of all, in order to find out what international marketing is, it's probably good to start defining the actual basic, which is marketing. According to the American Marketing Association, marketing is the activities, set of institutions, and processes for creating, communicating, delivering, and exchanging offerings that have value for customers, clients, partners, and society at large. The key word here, I would say, is this value creating aspect. So it can be real value, it can be perceived value, and it can be created through these institutions and processes. So there is pretty much anything you can do to create value in the mind of the consumer. So that's the easy definition of marketing. International marketing then becomes the company's commitment to coordinate this across international boundaries in order to find and satisfy global consumer needs, customer needs better than its competitor. So this is the academic definition of it. If we look at what some practitioners or some people might think about marketing, we can look at this Dilbert ad or this series, for instance. So what is it saying? You can't compete on price. We don't really have the quality, features, or service, which leaves us with fraud. And we would like you to call it marketing. I mean, it's a mean way of looking at it, but they're not completely wrong. You know, sometimes you might not have the superior product, but with good marketing, you might still get around that and manage to sell some of your products, at least in the short run. But as I said here, it's also to be doing it consistently, and you need to do it better than your competitors, right? How do we then, as international marketers, coordinating this and doing it better than our competitors across markets? It's difficult enough to do it domestically, but then moving over to do it across international borders, we can look at this example here. So let's imagine you have a company based in France. Marketing, as we talk about it, we usually talk about 4 Ps, right? Product, price, place, promotion. Sometimes, especially if you're into the service side of marketing, you can talk about 7 Ps. So you add the physical evidence, the people, and the processes as well. So in order for this business to successfully compete in its domestic French market, it needs to come up with a marketing program like this or a marketing mix like that. And hopefully they're doing it slightly better than the competition. If this business then wants to expand into, in this case, Belgium, they need to come up with another marketing program. So another set of product, price, place, promotion. If they then want to export further into United Kingdom, here comes another marketing program. So it's more work, but hopefully more income. And then if they want to expand further to Germany, Sweden, Finland, all over the world, the more they expand, the more marketing programs they need. So that is the general principle here of international marketing. And as you can imagine, the more countries you enter, the more countries you sell to, hopefully the more money you're going to make. So that's number one. But the more countries you enter, the higher the complexity as well. The more marketing programs to coordinate, or making changes to product offering, and looking at different legal environments and dealing with local politicians, and so on and so on. So it's more complexity and it's more coordination that needs to be done as well. And many see this as the cost of doing business. So in order to make more money, you have to do all of these additional things, which makes sense. And that's how international businesses have competed throughout the years. And in order to do it successfully, the discussion, or the push, has always also been to try to adapt and change the product, change the distribution, change the promotion to suit the local market as much and as good as possible. So this was the dominant discussion and the dominant practice among international businesses and exporters for quite some time as they started internationalizing. Up until about 40 years ago now, when a Harvard professor called Ted Levitt, he wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review, where he said that this thing that we have been doing, adapting towards all markets, might not be as necessary anymore. He basically claimed that you can pretty much sell the same products with similar pricing, similar distribution, similar promotion across all markets. So he said that you can start standardizing your offering. And he based that on the fact that the world was becoming more globalized. People were becoming better at foreign languages. Pretty much everyone started knowing English, and global media. So everyone gets exposed to the same type of information at pretty much the same time. So because of that, and of course, the growth of things like the European Union, so it makes it easier to cross borders and sell stuff across markets. So because of that, this guy, Ted Levitt, said that let's just standardize. Let's make things easy. Let's sell pretty much the same product, same pricing, same distribution, same promotion across markets as much as possible. And the argument for doing that was that, well, as I said, customers are becoming more and more similar globally. So customers all over the world have similar needs. By doing it as well, you get economies of scale. So you can start benefiting from economies of scale. Instead of having to reset your machinery and then changing your promotion, you do the same thing. And the more you do of the same product, the cheaper cost per unit becomes. So that's the basic principle of economies of scale. There are economists that are better than me at explaining it, but that was the general argument there. He also claimed that brands and companies that standardize tend to enjoy stronger global brand images, stronger corporate images, because customers, wherever they go in the world, will recognize the product, will recognize the brand. I'm drinking here at a Starbucks. We all know how the Starbucks look like because it's more or less similar. And that also helps launching new products, but much more quickly across markets, because you don't have to change them across markets. And another important aspect is that you can exploit the country of origin effects. I'm sure some of you have heard about country of origin effects, but it's basically, what do customers think about a product based on where it's made? So if I'm saying that last night I drank a very nice French wine, versus last night I drank a very nice Swedish wine. You know, people will be more jealous of me if I say that I drank a nice French wine, because France wine have a better country of origin effect than Swedish wine. I wouldn't want to drink a Swedish wine, to be fair. Or I have a nice Swiss watch on compared to a nice watch from India. So then Switzerland has a nicer country of origin effect when it comes to watches or cheese or chocolate or these type of things, or a nice Italian suit. So you understand what I mean when I'm talking about country of origin effects. And that is of course facilitated if you're selling more or less the same product across markets. Otherwise you will lose some of that. And so this was the principle, and a lot of companies started following. So just to look at some examples, we have here an ad for Marriott Hotels, an ad for Cathay Pacific, which are more or less standardized. As you can see, they just changed the language basically. And this makes sense because these are both global brands, so you want to create recognition wherever you go. Cathay Pacific, as an international airline, is international by default, so it makes sense for them as well to have more of a standardized offering. iPhone is another example. Apple products in general is another example where they try to standardize as much as humanly possible, because you get this much stronger consistent brand and corporate image. Talking about French wine, you know, exploiting the country of origin effects. This particular Chateau Lafite, you know, very nice wine, very expensive wine. You want to sell that pretty much the same all over the world because it's part of the brand image. You want the same products, the same packaging and everything in order to maintain the exclusivity and that country of origin effect. So, you know, there is a strong case why it's good. But what happened was that then there were other academics and practitioners that disagreed. So there is a counter argument that you shouldn't standardize as much as possible. You should try to adapt. And the argument here is that it's more true to the marketing concept. We just said in the beginning, marketing is about delivering as much value as possible to the customer. So if you adapt towards individual customers, hopefully they will find your product more valuable. So you can even go so far to customize it to specific customer needs. And that will more or less make that customer more happy than if you offer them some sort of basic standardized product. They also claim that by doing that, more foreign customers will purchase a product than if you're selling a standardized offering. So enhanced foreign market performance. And also by doing that, you have to learn about your foreign customers. So you build the knowledge base in your company, so you have better foreign market knowledge. And there is some research finding that if you offer local export managers or local country managers, if you offer them some autonomy, they feel empowered. So instead of just following headquarter regulations, how to market, how to sell your product, they get that autonomy to make up their own strategies a little bit. They feel more empowered. They feel more responsible for the product they're selling, which means that they're going to work harder. And what happens if you work harder? Most likely you're going to sell more and you're going to make more money. So more motivated foreign employees. And we have examples of that too then, of course. This is, in this particular case, it's an ad for Kraft mayonnaise. But what they have done in order to be able to sell the same product towards Muslim markets is that they use the same model, but they take two pictures. One towards the European market, one towards a Muslim market. Another example, we can look at McDonald's, which is often seen as an example of standardized products, but it's not. They do small adaptations depending on what market they want to enter in order to gain more market share and in order to suit that local market. So you can see different specific offerings for India, Hong Kong, Spain, Germany, and so on. And just to give you another example, I found this yesterday actually with the French wine and the Chateau Lafite. This is the 2008 vintage. And as much as it is a standardized product, what Chateau Lafite did in 2008 was that they adapted their bottle, as you can see there, with a Chinese sign, and that it would be the sign for 8, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason for that was threefold. Number one, the company had gone in to purchase vineyards in China, so they wanted to like show commitment to the country. Number two, 8 is the lucky number in China. And number 3, the Chinese market is huge. So even such a standardized company, standardized offering, did small adaptations to the packaging here to suit that particular local market. And the result is that they sold loads and loads of wine to the Chinese market. So as you can see, there are arguments for and against one or the other. And what I would want you to, since there are a bunch of managers here in the audience, I would be interested in seeing, based on your own opinions and based on your own views and experiences when it comes to standardizing versus adapting towards local markets, which one do you think is better? So it's simple. If you can take, I'm sure you all have your device. You should be able to then just use that QR code, and you will come to a landing page that says Fabrique Exportation. If that doesn't work, you can go to vbox.app and put in that ID 153171345. So just based on you people in the audience here, everything else equal, would you or are you more inclined to pursue a standardization or an adaptation strategy towards your foreign markets? I'll give you a few seconds to log in and answer. Seem to have 10 votes. But we have some people still logging in, it seems. I'll give you 10 more seconds and then we'll look at the result. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, so we have a kind of a mixed debate here. There are some that seems to prefer the standardization approach, but there seems to be a great majority going with the traditional marketing approach that adaptation is better, and looking at the advantages of adaptation being higher than the advantages of standardization. So this has been the debate, right? It's been ongoing since these early 80s among practitioners and among academics, and still it hasn't been fully resolved. But clearly that there is a practitioner debate out there. So if there is interest among export managers, it means that there's a problem that needs to be solved. And then that's when the academics come in and start looking at the problem that needs to be solved. And in this case, is it whether standardization or adaptation actually works better? Because we have these theoretical arguments, but we need to see which one works better. So what I did, coming over to my study now here, was that I started looking in the academic literature and the empirical academic literature. In other words, where there had actually been studies looking at the performance effects of standardization versus adaptation. And I went through all of the published material. I put it in tables like this. So you have the study and you had the sample, etc., just to see what these studies are finding, whether or not standardization is better, whether adaptation is better. And it was a lot of articles to read, so I put it all in tables, hundreds of articles. So these are the tables that I actually made. What I found is pretty much what we found in your vote there. Empirical findings are scattered. So some findings or some research looking at this question find a positive link between adaptation and performance. These are just some examples, just to show you. Others found a negative link. In other words, they found the standardization was better. And the great majority of empirical research, looking in different countries, different settings, and so on, found mixed or non-significant findings. In some cases, even the same authors. So in this case, these guys found a negative link. In this other case, they found non-significant findings. So it's really a mess out there. So people haven't found a strong relationship between one and the other. So the vote that you did pretty much reflects what is happening in the real world as well. So we had to start looking at what are the underlying assumptions here. Well, the underlying assumptions is that by examining whether standardization is better or adaptation is better, assumes the superiority of a particular strategy. And if you think about it, if one strategy is superior, why doesn't everyone follow that strategy? There are clearly companies in the world today that are doing more standardization, and there are other companies that are doing more adaptation. And they still seem to be able to compete, and they still seem to be able to make a profit. So examining this direct link might be the wrong way of approaching it. So what we then did is we moved on and look, okay, so if the direct link doesn't work, there must be another way of looking at it. And that's when we came into this contingency reasoning. So what we're talking about here is that it is not about which one is better, it's when which one is better. So this is the continuity theory reasoning. It asserts that the appropriateness of a specific strategy depends on its fit or co-alignment with the relevant environmental conditions. We can look at it graphically. Adaptation in itself isn't always good. Standardization in itself isn't always good, but it's good sometimes. And it's good when we manage to achieve this strategic fit. So this is pretty much where this long literature search took us. So what is this strategic fit then? If it's so good, what is it? Well, I'm just gonna walk you through some definitions. I don't want to become too academic, but just to give you an idea about what we're talking about. It's also referred to as congruency, contingency, matching, or co-alignment. We have a saying in Swedish that we find many names for those we love. So all of these are pretty much talking about the same thing, strategy fit. We can define it as the efficiency with which an organization's resources and capabilities are aligned with the opportunities and threats the environment presents. So whether what you're good at co-aligns with the environment you're in. So that's number one. But the second, you might have all these resources, capabilities, you also need to be able to implement it effectively. So that's the second part here, is the effectiveness with which the organization implements a chosen strategy in certain environments. So you might know what to do, but you might not know how to do it. In other words, you might have all the gifts in the world, but you don't know how to actually use your gifts in order to create export performance. If we continue looking at it, it seems like there's a general agreement that strategy fits. We started looking at it in more detail. It seems like it's something worth pursuing. Some of you might have taken MBA classes or remember from business school, Michael Porter. It's a Harvard professor, maybe arguably one of the most famous strategy professors in the world. You might know Porter's 5 forces, you might know Porter Diamond. He came up with all of these things. He's now worth, I checked yesterday actually, he's worth $468 million US. So he might be doing something right. A lot of it probably through investing, not just on a professor's salary, but still, I mean, it's a rich guy. He knows what he's talking about. So he says the strategic fit among many activities is fundamental, not only to competitive advantage, but the sustainability of that advantage. So it's a dynamic process as well. You might have to change what you're doing because the market is changing. So you want to continue having this fit. If we look at it in a more theoretical sense, we can say that a central theorem in all strategy research is the proposition that the processes of an organization must fit the concept for it to survive and be effective, implying that any firm's performance will be contingent on the fit between context, structure, and processes on any level. And I think the important aspect here is on any level. So it seems like it's something to pursue on many areas of your organization. So I sat down and thought a little bit about that, just to give some insights or give some questions or perspectives where fit research will be applicable in an exporting organization. So for instance, you might need to recruit new sales personnel to your foreign subsidiaries. What will be and what might be important there is to achieve fit between your corporate culture, your local culture where you are, and the personality of the sales personnel in order to be as effective as possible. You might have problems with customer satisfaction in a certain region. What you can look at then is the fit between the product, your distribution network, and the customer expectations. And you want them to kind of co-align in order for you to deal with that customer satisfaction problem. Or you might be into branding. So you might want to convey a unified brand image across your communication channels. So you're working with this integrated marketing communication. So here you have to then check fit between brand messages across communication channels. You might want to decide on a basic general strategy. Do you want to be a cost leader? Do you want to be a differentiator? So then you look at the fit between corporate strategy, your own capabilities, and the industry you're in. You might want to compare yourself for benchmarking purposes. So then you can look how your competitive advantages fit your competitors and how they're better than the others. Or bringing us to what we're talking about today, you might want insights into whether it's better to standardize or adapt your marketing program for overseas markets. So that's where the fit between your 4 Ps or the 7 Ps if you're a service and environmental contingencies affecting standardization and adaptation. So this is where our focus is for the day, but you can focus on all of these other things and do similar type of studies. So when you're setting something like this up, it's good to just recap what we know so far. So what do we know based on everything I said? Well, we know that the decision whether to standardize or adapt is an important one. It's a lot of research, a lot of the discussion. The issue is conscientious because people have strong opinions to one or the other and largely unresolved, as we found. Empirical findings are all over the place. But we also found that examining this direct link is probably the wrong way to approach it. So it's not about which one is better, it's about when they are better. And that's where the continuous reasoning comes in and the fit argument that we talked about. What we don't know though, so if we know all these things, maybe we're done, maybe we solved the problem, but we haven't. So what we don't know based on what we discussed is if fit is so good, how can you achieve it? So what are the antecedents of export marketing strategy fit? We need to find out, because otherwise, what's the point? Like, we know it's good, but we also want to know how to achieve it. Are there situations where fit is not good? So are there conditions under which marketing strategy fit is more or less effective? And thirdly, are the effects of adapting too much as bad as those of adapting too little? So is it, in other words, better to over adapt or under adapt? So are there differences, to go one way or the other? So these were the 3 things that we seem needed the most new knowledge. So based on that, we moved on to design, or I moved on to design a study with 3 objectives that then relate to these questions that I talked about. Examine the antecedents and impact of fit, examine how organizational complexity moderates, so how it affects the relationship between performance and fit, and then if there is a differential effect of over versus under adaptation. So these are the three main research questions I dealt with. Because we're professors, we need to have some sort of theory. I'm not going to go into that, but we need some sort of theoretical basis in order to get the paper published later on. So we looked at contingency, institutional, and capability theory. Right. Based on these theories and based on these research findings, then we set up a model that we wanted to test. And what our argument here is that in order to achieve fit, there needs to be some sort of need to adapt. So we did interviews with managers, 23 export managers in different industries, and we asked them, why do you adapt towards foreign markets? And they said it because there is a basic need to adapt in certain markets. And we measured this, and this can be measured as the degree of perceived difference between home market and focal export markets. And then there are a number of environments that you can look at differences like social, cultural, regulatory, technological, competitive intensity, etc., etc. We can look in detail on these later on if necessary. But the argument is, if there is a high need to adapt, the likelihood of achieving fit is lower. So if you're targeting an export market that is very different from your home market, you're less likely to have fit with your existing strategy, which means that you have a higher need to adapt. So because of that, there is a negative relationship. So the higher the need to adapt, the less amount of strategy fit. Strategy fit itself, I mean, we measured it in different ways. We don't have to look at it that much in detail, but there is an empirical way of doing it, fit as matching, and there is a theoretical way of doing it. But we looked at fit both ways, and we got similar results. So profile deviation and fit as matching. But you hopefully understand the general principle here. The higher the need to adapt, the less the fit. So the lower the need to adapt, the less you need to do, and you can still achieve fit. What we then also argued, though, is that, okay, there might be a need to adapt, but there are firms that have higher ability to adapt than others. So that would be called ability to adapt, organizational capabilities necessary for successful international marketing adaptation. This in turn, according to our discussions with managers and according to theory, consists of knowledge on how to adapt. And you can gain this by having been internationally exposed, having high international commitment, being in many international markets. So the more you are internationally exposed and the more you commit to it, the better you become. So that will give you adaptive knowledge. So when you have a need to adapt and adaptive knowledge, so you know how to do it, you're more likely to achieve fit. Sometimes though, as we said, maybe knowledge is not enough if you don't have the ability or the knowledge or the opportunity to execute it, because any strategy can fail if it's poorly executed. So then we also said, well, knowledge and control would be even better for achieving strategy fit. So that is the control over marketing mix decisions in the foreign market. So how much you control versus how much your importer controls with product decisions, pricing, distribution, promotion. And then, of course, if you have both knowledge and control and a need to adapt, you're even more likely to achieve strategic fit. So these three things together, we argue, will help create strategic fit. According to the literature and the theory, then, the better fit you have, the higher the performance. And we looked at performance in three ways: market performance, which has to do with how much you sell, sales increase; financial performance, more about return on investment, return on assets, these type of things; and customer performance, how happy are your customers, how much are they talking about your products and services, and are they referring you to other customers, and so on. So we hope that, or we expected that, higher fit gives better performance. We then also argue that fit is good, but it might be more important for more complex organizations. because of things like the bigger the organization is, the more difficult it is to be agile. You have this inertia in the decision-making processes in a larger organization versus a smaller organization. So fit is actually, in other words, more important in more complex organizations, which can be measured by things like firm size, and international scope. So international scope has to do with how many markets the organization is already selling to. So that was kind of the theoretical model, and then you have control variables. You have that as an academic. That's what we wanted to find out. But yeah, it's one thing to argue for a model and for a theory, and it's another thing to test it. So we needed to move on to test it. So I'll just briefly talk you through what we did. We did a mail survey of exporting manufacturing firms in the 3 largest industries in Sweden. And the 3 largest industries in Sweden, Sweden is basically because I am Swedish, so it was easier for me to get access. But also, Sweden as a country is very export dependent. You have a very small domestic market. So in order for companies to really grow, they have to sell outside of their own borders. The 3 largest industries are machinery and equipment. So we have companies like Volvo, Scania, SKF. Wood and paper products is the largest industry, and the 3rd largest industry is chemical products. So we're talking about products, not raw materials. If you think of wood and paper, yeah, it's one thing to just export timber, but we look at products. So there's a certain level of refinement in what is being sold. The focus is on the specific export market venture. As I said, we did a number of in-depth interviews with managers, and what we find was that these questions were relevant. We did develop a population using such as the Swedish official database of exporters. We found 1,016 firms that suited the selection criteria, and the criteria was the need to be at least 30 employees, and they need to have been exporting for at least 3 years. And we did that to see that they were kind of experienced and knew what they were talking about. We called all of them, 609 of them picked up. We sent questionnaires out, 341 came back. We looked at things like non-response bias. I can talk about that later if we have to. And importantly, we asked for performance. We contacted them again 1 year later to ask about their export performance. So we asked for the strategy at year 1, we asked for performance at year 2, so we can actually link the action to the result. Otherwise, you have this problem with causation is not the same as correlation. We tested it using structural equation modeling. You don't need to worry about it. Basically, these are preliminary findings. Basically, the method is looking at how variation in one variable causes variation in another variable. So if, what happens if need to adapt goes up with actual adaptation and so on. The important ones to look at here are the numbers with the stars under. These are the significant ones. What we found was that need to adapt in itself, you see there's no stars here, wasn't necessarily negatively related to fit. There was no statistically significant relationship. However, the rest of our hypothesized relationship are significant and in the expected ways. So when you have knowledge and need, you seem to create fit. When you have execution and need, you seem to be able to create fit. When you have need, knowledge, and control, you seem to be able to create fit. We also found that when you have fit, you get performance. And then when larger firms and higher scope firms have fit, you get even better performance. And this is just a way of showing it in terms of a graphical. So what we see here is companies that have little adaptive knowledge and low need to adapt have pretty good fit, and companies that have high need to adapt and high adaptive knowledge have pretty good fit. And similar here with execution control, you see the same trend. we see the same here. This is the performance, right? So you can see that when firm size, which is the full, the non-dotted line, when firm size is small or when scope is small, there is no difference in performance between high and low fit. But when firm size is large, there is a difference. So when you have low fit, you have worse performance. When you have high fit, you have better performance. Similarly with scope. So when you're active in many markets, fit is more important than when you're not active in many markets. Thirdly, as we said, we had another question. Is it worse to adapt too much or too little? To find that out, we needed to use another method. We call it, or they call it, polynomial regression. You basically, as you run a equation on the data that can then plot a three-dimensional pattern. And what it shows us is, so you have a need to adapt, you had adaptation, and you have performance. When the need to adapt is high and your adaptation is low, so your performance is very low. Vice versa, when you need to adapt is low and your adaptation is high, you have very low performance. However, when need to adapt is low and adaptation is low, performance is up here, and you can see that it's pretty much shaped like a saddle. So it's a symmetric pattern showing that it's equally bad to adapt too much as it is to adapt too little. So you have a very even effect. So it's basically bad to do either too little or too bad or too much. Okay, that was quickly about the study. Back to the original question, and then I'm going to give you the chance to discuss this. How can exporters then optimize the marketing adaptation strategy? Well, based on these findings, I sat down and I thought, okay, how can I recommend managers to do stuff based on these findings? Based on my first finding, I'd say don't adapt your marketing if you don't have to. Because what we found was that even if there might be a high need to adapt, it doesn't necessarily lead to lower fit. How can you know whether or not you need to adapt then? Well, you can use this tool that I developed. This is basically the survey that was developed together with managers. And you can look at things like economic development, social cultural environment, regulatory environment. And if things are very different between your market and the market you're targeting, probably you have a higher need to adapt. If things are very similar, you don't have that much of a need to adapt, and then probably you shouldn't. Just to give you some example here, there might be technical aspects. I used to live in Belgium for a couple of years, and I don't know if you still have these in France, but in Belgium they hadn't when I was there. These ASCII keyboards. So what we're looking at here are language differences, right? And if you're a computer manufacturer and these are the type of keyboards that local language or the local market is using, probably you should do those technical adaptations. So I lived in Belgium, I needed a new computer. I couldn't write on those keyboards. I had to go back to Sweden to buy a new computer so I could use the good old QWERTY. But, you know, this is a basic need for adaptation for a computer manufacturer, depending on what market you're targeting. But it's not a big adaptation. Similarly, we were talking about McDonald's. So this is the Indian version of the Big Mac. Why do they have their own version? Well, what is one thing with India? Well, there's the Hinduism. So their religion is telling us that cows are holy. So probably it's a bad idea to sell Big Mac. So they do the Maharaja Mac, which is chicken based. So it's a cultural adaptation. And they have to do that in order to sell burgers because of that. So these are two examples where you might have to adapt. So that's number one. Number two, so you might find that there is a need to adapt based on what I showed here. But before you start venturing into it, thoroughly assess whether or not you have the abilities to the second stage of a model. And the way we checked it was with adaptive knowledge. And you can then look at your own business, look at things like how committed are you to exporting? How dependent are you on foreign income, and how long have you been exporting. If you have high levels of this type of knowledge, then it's maybe a better idea to adapt. If you don't have that, maybe you should not do it. Similarly, execution control. Again, this tool is based on our work with managers. You can assess things like product quality, product design, product branding. To what extent do you have control, and to what extent do your importer have control? So if you have more control, then it's easier for you to adapt. And then you can also see whether or not these things are important for you. So generally based on that, the second recommendation is, if you don't have the knowledge or ability, stay away from that market until you have either one or the other. So look towards simple markets before you start going into the more complex one, especially if you're a smaller company and you can't afford to lose sales. Number 3, so let's say you have both knowledge and ability. Your primary adaptations should be the ones that are kind of mandatory. So we can go back to the checklist that I provided. Some adaptations are more important than others in order for you to be able to even enter foreign markets. For instance, technical aspects. A simple thing like if you're selling electronic product, different markets have different plugs or even different voltage systems. And this is something you need to do in order for it to be able to sell. So this is something I noticed, for instance, when moving to Canada from Europe. I had to buy a completely new set of electronics because it's a different, I guess it's type A, and I come from type F. No, I actually came from UK, which was type G. So you see, it's a mess and you need to do it. Then once you have done these mandatory ones, you can move on to the more discretionary adaptations, given you have enough resources. One example, after moving to Canada, I noticed that Coca-Cola has gone so far to make even regional adaptations, not just national adaptations. So I found these in the stores in Canada. So it's Coca-Cola adapted towards the Quebec market. And the difference is that they're blue, so they look cool. But secondly, they're sweetened with maple syrup instead of corn sugar. But Coca-Cola can obviously do this because they do have the size and the resources to fine-tune their adaptations like that. Fourth, even if you have both the ability and knowledge for infinite adaptation, it's not always better to do more, as we found with this finding, the saddle-shaped performance relationship between adaptation and performance. For the simple reason that if you adapt too much, you start losing money. It's a suboptimal resource allocation. You can lose some of the country of origin benefits that we talked about. You can lose some of that global brand image that we talked about. And all of these adaptations will slow down your speed for new products. Versus if you adapt too little, if you standardize too much, you're gonna start losing sales. So it's all about that balance. And finally, number 5, achieving strategic fit is good, but it's more important for organizations that are complex. So smaller exporters seem to be less dependent on fit than larger exporters. So smaller exporters can therefore focus more on building these knowledge bases and gaining that execution control. Because as you can see from our findings, when there are smaller companies, which are these 2 lines, the difference in performance between high fit and low fit is not as exaggerated as for the larger and more internationally active firms. So this summarizes the recommendations based on the findings. And with that, I rest my case and thank you. And I'm happy to discuss these findings and answer any questions that you might have.